Choujin Sentai Jetman is the 15th iteration of the long-running Super Sentai series of spandex-clad superheroes fighting rubber monsters with explosions and giant robots, and I guess that makes it worthy of getting a Nintendo Famicom game in 1992. Though when you really think about it, why wouldn't you turn that into a video game? It's a great idea for a nice little action game, and a nice little action game is what we got here on the family computer, and not much else. Choujin Sentai Jetman comprises 6 levels of play, 5 of which can be played in any order you wish, similar to that one game over there, though it really doesn't matter which order you play these levels. After picking a level, you get to choose your Jetman of choice, each with slight differences in terms of attacks and hit points, but otherwise pretty much play the same way. Red Hawk and Black Condor are equipped with Bringer Swords and have the most hit points, while White Swan and Blue Swallow have Bird Blasters that shoot targets at a distance and are the weakest in terms of hit points. Yellow Owl is the only true unique player in the game, armed with wing gauntlets and possessing a moderate amount of hit points. And those are the only differences afforded among the Jetman team. In addition to their unique traits, the Jetmen also possess 2 additional attacks shared among the group. A hopping kick, which is useful for close-up attacks and has a rather wide hitbox for lack of a better term, and a screen-clearing special attack that can only be used when your bird icon is active. And that's pretty much it for the Jetman crew. Once those choices are out of the way, the game begins proper. Jetman's a pretty standard side-scrolling platform game where you move to the right, killing grunts and the occasional barriers, collecting health pickups dropped by slain foes, and eventually making your way over to the boss where you'll summon your giant mecha Zord thing, Great Icarus. The boss battles operate in the form of a rather rudimentary fighting game, as you occasionally punch your opponent while blocking his attacks. In addition to the health meter, there's also a power meter that builds up on its own. Depending on how much power you've accumulated, you can perform a special attack of some kind, whether it be a stun ray or some random projectile, and with a full meter you can perform a really powerful wave attack. Drain the boss of health completely and watch Great Icarus perform its final attack to slay the beast and clear the current area. Once the initial 5 areas are cleared, you move on to the final level of the game where the remaining Vyram forces await you. When a Jetman is defeated during a stage, you'll be prompted to pick another to challenge the level, respawning at the beginning or at a checkpoint. Your team of Jetmen aren't just 5 different characters, well, technically 3 different characters and 2 color swaps, but they're also essentially your 5 lives. The game ends when all 5 Jetmen are defeated or when Great Icarus falls in battle during the boss stages. But clearing a stage will revive any fallen members, and the whole team will be ready for battle in the next area that you choose. Fortunately, you not only have unlimited continues to try again, but you also have a relatively straightforward password system to resume your progress at a later time. It's short, sweet, simple, to the point, the kind of password system that everybody likes. Choujin Sentai Jetman is a game developed by Natsume, who has a catalog of some damn good games on the NES, whether it be Shatterhand, Shadow of the Ninja, or the 2 Power Blade games. And whereas those games had some aspects that made them unique fun experiences and as a result memorable games, the only thing unique about Jetman on the Famicom is the license. And this is where the game kinda hurts because while it's functional and actually quite a decent little platformer, it is also very basic in its approach, as the level design has this rather simple, straightforward thought process. You move to the right, you kill some bad guys, you make a couple jumps here and there, and you keep going until you reach the end of the level. This is every Jetman level in a nutshell, and it never deviates from that basic formula. The platforming is never really an issue. It really boils down to knowing where enemies are placed and being properly prepared to tackle them head on. Really, the only difficult portion of the game are the boss battles. The platforming segments are fairly brief in length, they only go in one direction, there's not much to them. It's a fairly shallow game in that regard, and that's Jetman's only real sticking point because what is there does work the way it's supposed to. I mean, the game's straightforward enough to be easily understood, there's a modest bit of variety among the Jetmen that make them somewhat different and unique, and the action is competently executed. It's a fine game on its own, a solid game that's quite fun for the most part. I just wish they did a little more to spruce up this half of the game, but I guess that's what the big robots are for, and well, I guess that's the part everyone cares about. Now, the giant robot battles, the mecha battles, the Zord battles, whatever you want to call them, the boss battles, let's just get that out of the way, These all play pretty much the same way. They might change the boss graphics a bit and tweak the AI a bit to provide some difficulty, and some of these are pretty tough until you learn their attack patterns. But beyond that, after a while, all these fights start to feel a bit tedious. That said though, the mecha fights are actually pretty fun and are the focus of the game's other mode, Battle Mode, where you can test your skills against the first 5 bosses of the game. The whole thing boils down to knowing when to attack, when to block and counter-attack, and whether to impose a defensive strategy to wait until your meter is charged and block in the meantime, or go for a fool's rush in approach and get completely massacred. Perhaps most importantly about these battles is that you could actually control your giant robot and fight the monster and not participate in some rubbish quick-time event mini-game crap thing like some other games I've played. Jesus Christ. Control in Choujin Sentai Jetman is your typical functional fare. You have your traditional button mapping of A jumps, B attacks, and they work. Though Jetman is one of those oddball titles where select is pause and start executes your special attack. I always found that a bit weird, but it does work. The same control scheme applies to the boss battles, which I generally make a big stink about one-on-one fighting games having a jump button instead of pressing up to jump like most games do. But since this is part of a game and not the whole game, I don't think it's a big deal. The game provides you with 2 difficulty settings, but even on normal, this could probably be beaten in less than an hour, maybe even half an hour if you're really good. There is a code where if you hold A and B on the title screen and press start, you can enable hard and very hard modes. But all this does is reduce your Jetman to one-hit kills and eliminates passwords, so you have to beat this all in one sitting. It doesn't make the actual levels any harder, so if you could do a perfect run in normal mode, then these modes are practically worthless. Which isn't to say that a perfect run is easy, it never is, but if you could pull it off without having to put in a code, kinda makes the code worthless, but I digress. Choujin Sentai Jetman's graphics are typical 8-bit fare. While the simple color-swap Jetman portraits are nice renditions of the team, their in-game caricatures are substantially less so. The humanoid characters in the game are just generic-looking humanoids that come off looking like mock-ups from a generic sprite template, with some pixels rearranged to create vaguely different characters. The various stages look alright with some nice detail work to them and holds up rather well compared to Natsume's other NES stuff, but it's nothing really special. The cinematics of Jet Icarus and Jet Garuda forming Great Icarus is neat, as is the opening intro, which isn't in this video for some reason. The actual sprites in the boss battles look fairly decent, even if they animate somewhat poorly. It's not a bad looking game, it's somewhat decent looking, and that's about it really. Sound-wise, it's pretty good. Natsume usually has some good music in their video games, not necessarily their Power Ranger titles on Game Boy Advance, but that's a different story. Jetman follows in that tradition rather nicely. The good tunes part, not the GBA part, because that's just stupid and why did I bring it up? The game has some catchy, appropriately pumping tunes throughout the game, and even has a nice rendition of the Jetman theme song from the TV show. It's actually quite a nice opening tune, by the way. Sound effects are alright, some of them sound recycled from a couple other games, or at least sound somewhat familiar, but that was a common thing back in the day, so no stinks raised here. Overall, Choujin Sentai Jetman for the Nintendo Famicom is fairly above average fare. It's a competent enough side-scroller that plays well enough for what it is, and certainly does its best to respect the source material as much as possible, but lacks any kind of substance that would make this a truly noteworthy game. Outside of the boss battles with the mechas and stuff, Jetman lacks that spark, that kind of creative thought and uniqueness that was evident with Natsume's other NES titles like Shatterhand or Shadow of the Ninja. The boss battles are fine, but when you make it its own battle mode, it kinda shows me where most of the fun lies and tells me the rest of the game is pretty worthless. You could make the argument that it's kid stuff and maybe keep it simple, but I don't know, I think there's wiggle room to give Jetman a little more than just robot fights in a simple platform game. But as it is, on its own merits, Choujin Sentai Jetman is merely a competent platform game with some fun little Zord fights that's certainly good enough to satisfy those who are into Super Sentai or curious about the early works of a developer who would eventually create a number of games for the later Power Rangers franchise, but beyond that, it doesn't do anything special to stand apart from its contemporaries. All in all, Jetman on the Famicom is good enough for what it is, plays it safe, keeps it perhaps a bit too simple, but is still a somewhat satisfying romp worth checking out if you like Super Sentai Rangery stuff or simple action side-scrolling games on the NES Famicom thing.